Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 3. My name is Elisera Rosato, and I'm joined by my esteemed panel members from SARS, from Practice, as well as from the Ombud. We're here today to talk about the Office of the Tax Ombud, some of the strides that they've made in the last couple of years, them dealing with systemic issues, how they deal with complaints. We hope we're going to give you an informative session around all of those areas, but as a quick introduction, on my right we have the CEO of the OTO, Office of the Tax Ombud, Professor Thabo Lagwala. He has extensive experience in the academia, private practice, as well as public sphere. He's also an author, co-author, am I right, Thabo, of a textbook, Tax Academy 2013, it was issued. And he is joined by Talita Muabe, Senior Manager in their Operations Division. Talita happens to be a neighbor of mine in the Northwest, but she has 15 years and more experience in government as well as in private sector. She knows a hell of a lot about systemic issues. She drives that passionately, so we're keen to hear her thoughts on that. And then Andre Botma, who's joined us all the way from Cape Town. He's in private practice and he's the CEO of Irafu. He is an avid social media fundi, and he's got 60,000 followers on X, previously known as Twitter. And he really knows what the man on the street is thinking, so keen to hear his thoughts. And then Mr. Broughton, Wayne Broughton, he heads up the Chief Litigation Officer of litigation, of pre-litigation at SARS. Long list of duties you've got here, Wayne. You also deal with the function of integrity of dispute resolution, and you make recommendations on the enhancement of the framework. So happy to have all of you here and really keen to hear your thoughts. We've prepared a whole range of questions. We're going to leave questions from the audience and online to last, if you're happy with that. But maybe to kick things off, Professor Thabo, tell us about the last 10 years at the OTO. Tell us about the strides that have been made. Tell us about the exciting development of the first female Ombud, Yanga Mputa, who's recently been appointed, I think it was July 2023. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And good morning to everybody. I think that I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the Said for having us here, to always talk about the good work that we do as an office, right, Talita? So, as most of you would know, the Office of the Tax Ombud was created back in 2013, and it's very important at all times to reconsider and acknowledge the reason why the office was created. The office was created back then as an avenue for taxpayers who have complaints against SARS to come to our office so we could assist them with systemic, procedural, and administrative matters. So that is what the purpose of the office is. So it's a taxpayer-centric office, regardless of the fact that it is impartial, it's free and fair in terms of its services. At its inception, it was headed up by Judge Bernard Mwepe, who recently, for obvious reasons, received the Lifetime Award here, partly because of the good work that he did in the office and everywhere else. So, which is very great. I think the mandate of the Office of the Tax Ombud should be known to all of you here. We struggle with trying to get taxpayers to understand our mandate, and we always hope that practitioners and tax fundies would know our mandate. But just to repeat, we assist taxpayers with complaints relating to administrative, procedural, and service matters. We've achieved quite a lot. I mean, we are a young office. We're just 10 years old. In October, we will be having our 10th anniversary. You know, it's a big thing. It's for such an office. And what we have achieved in the past 10 years is quite great. And at our inception, we were very much created by the TAA as an office that depended on SARS for a lot of things, including the secondment of employees, including our finances, our budget. And we've managed over the years, notably in 2016, to remove that to such an extent that now we are able to employ our own employees, and we've got our own budget that is ring-fenced and that is not controlled at the level of the SARS. A number of things that we have done, I mean, I guess we deal with normal complaints by taxpayers. We've also delved into concentrating on systemic issues and systemic investigations, because those are very important. They touch on the lives of many taxpayers. You know, when a taxpayer comes and complains about not getting a certificate of residence, and we get that facilitate the taxpayer obtaining that from SARS, it's well and good. But if numerous taxpayers or a number of taxpayers are also unable to do that, it becomes a big issue. So when we've got these issues that affect more than one taxpayer or affect numerous taxpayers, we put them in the basket of systemic issues. We investigate that, we deal with that, and we resolve tax issues for a number of taxpayers. Talita will talk to you about systemic investigations and the outcomes that have come up on that. In our structure, the way we are structured and our mandate and what we can do, our powers and things like that, you know, I always compare us with ourselves. I always say that we need to look at ourselves, we need to look at our country, we need to look at our taxpayers and say, are we doing what the taxpayers need? Do we add value? Do we add sufficient value to our taxpayers before we can even look at what everybody else is doing in the world? And you know, we pat ourselves in the back over and over again, looking at the outcomes of what we do. So you would know that a lot of tax practitioners would lament the fact that our recommendations, we can only make recommendations to SARS, and our recommendations are not binding. But at the same time, our recommendations, the recommendations, or 98% of our recommendations are implemented by the SARS, which is a great thing. It actually goes to show not only the good work that we do, but also the good relations that we have with the South African Revenue Service. We also obviously do look at ourselves versus the world, and we say, you know, in as much as we're not optimum, we really still think that there are improvements that we need in our office. We look at what happens and when we look at what could be done, we look at what is done in the world. One can get excited and say, you know, you look at the protocol in Mexico, you look at the US model, you look at the Australian model, and say our equivalents are able to even, for example, in some countries, issue penalties for the revenue authorities. We are not able to do that. But we are lucky that our tax authority right now still listens to us, and then they implement our recommendations. The concerning thing about that is that it tends to be something that depends on, you know, when something is not legislated, it depends on the goodwill of the person that receives that. If you get a different kind of staff, if you get different management of the South African Revenue Service, you might just find a situation where that trajectory changes and it becomes different. But we also look at what's happening in our equivalent countries, like developing countries all over the world. We find that most of them would not have a specific tax ombud or an ombud dedicated to tax services. You've got general ombuds that worry about, I'm like, from what I hear from some of the officers, they worry about pensions not being paid, people not being treated well in hospitals. They worry about abuse by law enforcement authorities. So you find that these ombuds, they actually don't even realize that they've got tax concerns to deal with. So we find ourselves somewhere in the middle. We obviously want to be right at the top, but we find ourselves in the middle, and we think that there is a little bit of improvement that could be done. One of the other things that came up recently was our compilation of taxpayers' rights, obligations, and entitlements. That is a document that we put together in order to alert taxpayers or to bring to the attention of taxpayers the rights that they have, most importantly, the emphasis on the rights. Because although these rights are contained in various pieces of legislation that you all know about, they are not that accessible. Some of people would not even know that they've got a right to finality. We just thought that we could codify that so that people could say, and it received quite a lot of good feedback on that. It's very good. Our complaints continue. We see more mutation than innovation. We see more kind of like complaints that we've had before coming in a different form. We keep ourselves up to date with what the SARS is doing. We meet with them. We discuss with them and resolve these matters, and I will talk about that if Sarah gives me another opportunity to speak.
I'm going to cut you short.
I know you are going to cut me, that's why I want to finish now. Just on your specific point that you raised, the appointment of the new tax ombud, the first female tax ombud, Ms. Yangamputa, it's very welcomed. We are very happy to no longer be in the limbo. You would remember that we had a 9-month period. A child could have been born within that period. We had a 9-month period of no tax ombud, and now we've got it sorted. We're looking forward to working with Yanga. We kind of like guarantee you that the mandate of the Office of the Tax Ombud is prescribed in the Tax Administration Act, and our role will always be to further that. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Talbot. So, leading on to that very quickly, because I think he's taken up a lot of your time, Talita. But just talk us a little bit about past and present and future experiences. Talbot's mentioned a lot of complaints and how you are successful in terms of turning those complaints or recommendations into ultimate feedback and clarity to taxpayers. But tell us, what are your experiences from your position or your lens in terms of interactions past, present and future with SARS?
Well, thanks, Sarah. What I can tell you is that we have enjoyed very good relations with SARS in terms of our relations in dealing with taxpayers' complaints. We also have a memorandum of understanding that guides us on how to address these issues that are affecting taxpayers, and also the time frames which we're striving for both of us on both sides to adhere to. And we have structured meetings or engagements with SARS where we meet frequently to address these challenges that are faced, especially when we deal with taxpayers, because in some instances we find situations where taxpayers' complaints are not finalized on time, even when we have made recommendations to SARS. And over the years, we have seen an improvement in terms of the rate at which SARS is resolving such complaints. And with the recent appointments of the deputy commissioners, we are excited about it because we are of the view that it will help to speed our processes in terms of dealing with SARS. Because obviously with the deputy commissioners, we would be able to engage them even on the operational issues that are affecting taxpayers and the Office of the Tax Ombud, considering that the Office of the Tax Ombud is still not structurally independent from SARS. So we have seen a lot of improvement since the inception of the Office of the Tax Ombud, which is something that we really appreciate.
Sounds positive, Talita. So
Yes.
we're in Europe next. We know you're not at the forefront of these type of complaints, but you sure have a view on the litigations, pre-litigations. We're just thinking, well, tell us a little bit about remedial steps. Tell us a bit about your thinking around the complaints areas, potentially on dispute resolution. Where's SARS headspace? We've heard the 3 new deputy commissioners. They've been appointed, I think it was July. Johnston Makuba is the one, Carl Scores is the second one, I think Bridget Blackburn's just joined. So give us a bit of an inside glimpse on the dispute resolution space.
Okay, so Ella, I think that where the area that I represent fits in with the Ombud is around the complaints on disputes. Even though the number in SARS's terms is relatively small, it's still a significant or substantial portion of the OTO's complaints that they receive. It's disproportionate to the volume. And we've given a lot of thought as to why that is. And I think if you consider that there might be 3 categories of disputes, where a taxpayer genuinely doesn't really understand why they've been assessed or why the refund is less than what they expected. Another category would be that they perhaps understand fully and have a genuine dispute. And then there's the third category that ends up in litigation, where they obfuscate and it's frivolous, and that's a whole different category of taxpayer. So it's a complicated area, and it's a difficult area to get to grips with. I think internationally, tax administrations struggle with disputes because it's a review, it's a rework. So it is slow. I know in the Canadian Revenue Authority, they published their TALAT report, their Tax Administration Diagnostics Report from 2018. And the TALAT Secretariat mentioned there that they're going to recalibrate the period within which tax administrations have to deal with the dispute, because hardly any of them meet the required times. So it is an area where obviously taxpayers are irate. They obviously they have no expectation of, or they have an expectation of a refund, which is now denuded, or they suddenly have an assessment which they don't understand.
And you've brought out your service charter, a renewed one now recently on the 1st of September, where I noticed under the appeals section you were saying you're going to try and get 7 out of 10 done within 60 days. You're going to try 7 out of 10, getting back to the taxpayer on time. You're going to try reaching out with supplementary information documentation. Is that something that you obviously are striving towards, because in practice you struggle with internal inefficiencies, or?
Sure. So I think that the capacity around appeals in particular has been limited. This year we received, or last year I think we received around 9,600 appeals in the year. We deal with, on average, annually around 6,000 of them. This year is somewhat different because we convinced the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioners that we need to supplement our capacity, and we've got an extra number of people, 42, for a period of time that we've been running as a project. And the goal is to reduce the backlog of appeals to, on those that are reaching a year, to reduce it to 0. And there's about 6,000 of them. And to date, I think we've finalized around 4,600, 4,700. So it's very much on par. But it's a treadmill, because as you're completing these appeals, new ones are coming in. So 28% more appeals came in 2022. 28% additional came in 2023. I think Einstein said the most powerful force in the universe was compounded interest. So the compound effect of that is 64% more appeals now than there was 2 years ago. So we're looking at a host of different alternatives. The vast majority of the disputes that we have, the vast majority, 90%, 92%, we resolve through engagement with taxpayers. So it's only 8% or 7% that we actually decide to go to court on. In those cases, I have to say we have a very high success rate, an 87% success rate in court. That's just for those tax practitioners.
The key message is talk to
I have
SARS,
to
don't
tell you
litigate.
that.
I know. Andre, you've been silent. Tell us a little bit about your complaints area and your practice. I know you deal with personal income tax and small companies more often than not, but tell us about your environment. What are you seeing from a complaints perspective?
I mean, from complaints, I think one of the areas which we will address later is the issue with auto assessments, but they don't turn into objections necessarily. The one thing that I did pick up that has stick its head out is the situation where SARS would disallow pay as you earn from taxpayers who they can possibly prove from pay slips that it was deducted from them. That's an area of concern because SARS would say that taxpayers are responsible for their own tax affairs, and the employer would, And then what does the taxpayer do? Because they rely on the employer to deduct the pay as you earn fairly and pay that over to SARS, obviously. And then the other area that I've also picked up is the area on home office. I feel like home office, the legislation around home office should be updated to reflect the change in the work environment that has taken place since COVID. Because when COVID happened, most of the workplaces were forced to work from home, and then all of a sudden, then SARS changed the rules to say you can't claim interest anymore, and people still try to claim telephone and internet, and that's still the case. So there's still a bunch of objections done that's incorrect, but I feel like legislation could be updated to say that, look, we realize that more people are working from home, and widen that part. But those are the two main areas where I've dealt with disputes in my practice.
And before you step off, maybe you can even talk a little bit around, I know you've done some of your own little bit of polling
Yes.
on the OTO,
Yes.
and around what the man on the street thinks or knows about the OTO. Maybe you want to just share some of those data points with us.
Yeah, and I think when I refer to the man on the street, I'm looking at everyone here, and I consider everyone to be the person on the street. If you've got a social media account, you could have been the one who polled on it. The poll reached about 5,000 people, and 330 actually voted. And I simply asked the question, do you know who the Tax Ombud is and what they do? And 38% said yes, they do know who they are, but 62% said, no, we don't know who the Ombud is and what they do. And after conversations with Talita, we've potentially decided to, let's see if we can increase the awareness across all taxpayers to be more aware of what the Ombud does. But also, I think a lot of people don't know how to go from a grievance with SARS, which is, you pick up the phone, you get a case number, you lay a complaint, and you take a complaint to the Ombud. I don't think the average person even knows that process. So when they go straight to the Ombud, they get kicked because they say you haven't gone through the complaints process yet. And that's why the Ombud has only, I think it's a 2-star rating on Google. But that explains it.
It's social media for you. That makes you very worried, right?
It does get me very worried. But my defensive self kind of thinks like, what would be the answer? How would the answer be different if you were to ask, what does an ophthalmologist do to a normal person in this field? They might not know. Right?
100%
So that's
agree
me
with
being
you.
defensive. Look, what you're saying is very important. It's very concerning. But at the same time, you also look at your audience who should know about you. Like a lot of people would tend to know about the Tax Ombud once they know about the SARS, once they get into trouble with the tax. Yeah. So we what we do is we've tried our level best to reach out as much as we can to taxpayers out in the world under the leadership of Pelsi Opela, our communications head and stakeholder engagement. She arranges these workshops where we educate taxpayers about our office. But, some of the visits that we've done to malls reveal that it'll be people who have some sort of a tax concern that would come to us. Other people just walk past because you say tax, they're like, I don't pay tax, so I don't have a problem with that. Now, but where it's more concerning is where it is tax practitioners who either don't know about the Tax Ombud or who don't know what we do and who don't know that we're free. It's not. We often do get calls where somebody calls and says, as a practitioner, asking how much would you charge me? We're like, no, don't worry, you get this service for free. We know you're going to charge your client, but we will give you the service for free. That comes down in numbers. For example, we receive about 4,000 complaints a year. We accept about 2,000, and of those 2,000 that we reject because the person, the taxpayer or the tax practitioner would have, either that we don't have, it's not part of our mandate, or 90% of those that we reject will be because the practitioner or the taxpayer did not follow the right processes, like they didn't exhaust with the SARS, you understand? And then you go back or deeper into the statistics, it reveals that this it's equal. It's like 50% of the cases would be brought to us by practitioners, and they would have not exhausted, which basically means that practitioners themselves who know about us, 50% of them don't know that they need to exhaust before they come to our office. Well, I talk too much.
Talita, you've been sitting patiently, and I know you want to talk about systemic issues. And I mean, the last report was 2000. It spoke around the pay-as-you-earn account. It was dismal. It spoke about VAT refunds being withheld. It spoke about dispute resolution. Wayne spoke there. Tell us, where has there been improvement since your last report, and where are you heading towards now?
Okay, starting with the pay-as-you-earn, what we noticed when we were doing the systemic investigation, with the data that we reviewed, we noticed that especially after receiving the responses from SARS on the clarity-seeking questions that we sent them, we noted that the majority of taxpayers did not understand how SARS applied the payment rules, right? Because the complaints that they brought to us as systemic, we found that there was nothing wrong that SARS actually did. It was lack of communication, if I may have to put it like that, from the SARS side, especially where taxpayers asked for clarity. We found that to be lacking from SARS. But even when you read the systemic report, we concluded that there are no findings where we could say SARS has done something wrong, except that they needed to improve the communication with taxpayers. In terms of the dispute resolution, which my colleague Wayne is here, it's still a thorn even today for us, because we found that both sides, SARS and the taxpayers, were not adhering to the timeframes, but more on the SARS side, right? SARS was not adhering more as compared to the taxpayers, and it's where we are still even getting complaints even now, because like Wayne has just confirmed, there are still challenges in terms of addressing such, especially with the appeals. We still have complaints where taxpayers are complaining that SARS is not actioning them on time. So, but we have seen an improvement at the rate at which they deal with these appeals when the Office of the Tax Ombud escalate them. So it's important for practitioners that are sitting here that when you have appeals that are not addressed by SARS, you can quickly come to us, because you know we're going to facilitate resolution for you. Because we saw that SARS really take our recommendations seriously, because they understand that taxpayers had waited so long for them before they could bring their complaints to us. The systemic investigation in relation to the delayed refunds, it's still an issue even today. We're still receiving complaints where SARS would put stoppers on refunds, especially where in some instances there is no reason really for SARS to put them, because they would have finalized maybe a verification or an objection, but they put a stopper on it. But also as comment SARS that once we escalate to them, they would then action them. However, there are cases that would take a little bit longer, especially those ones where SARS would say we have identified additional risks on this taxpayer, and some taxpayers, especially the practitioners, there's one case that Prof escalated to me yesterday, which is similar to what I'm giving an explanation for. It was a verification, and we escalated to SARS, and SARS identified additional risks, and it was routed to the specialized investigative audit, right? We explained that to the practitioner, and she was very angry with the Office of the Tax Ombud. But when you understand the process that goes behind the scenes, you would understand why the Office of the Tax Ombud cannot be seen to be interfering with the process within SARS. Again, what could help taxpayers is for SARS to communicate better with taxpayers, because in most of these complaints that we see, and deal with is just SARS lacking to communicate with taxpayers. And, you know, and what is of interest is that even SARS people, they would say, go to the tax ombud, you will get a response quickly, you know. So that's what we like. So yes, we have seen improvements, and we really appreciating that.
So interesting. Pricewaterhouse has just finalised our Taxing Times 2023 annual survey that we conduct. 6 years in a row that we've been conducting it. And interesting, as you were talking through some of the areas of concern, a main area of concern of what respondents were saying is lack of communication.
Yes.
So this is a theme that's now interesting, sitting with the Ombud. We're picking it up from medium to large company feedback, respondents. Wayne, what's your take on it from a dispute arena perspective?
So I think that from 2003, ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution, was introduced into the South African tax arena. And we've been practicing that for the last 10 years. If you look at developments in other countries, they bring dispute resolution right up front. So maybe it's time that we start to consider that as an option, because communication is a problem. I don't want to slag SARS, but I have seen communications to taxpayers. The one that I saw yesterday was, your docs are not legit. That's not acceptable. That doesn't really take anything anywhere. None of the people in SARS at like a leadership level would affirm that type of communication. And what you said about communication being vital is absolutely critical. The majority of the cases that end up in appeals, 90%, as I said earlier, are resolved through engagement. So if we can bring
better, right?
Yes. So if we can bring engagement up before even, like the Australians do, engagement happens in an ADR in this ring-fenced environment prior to even an assessment being raised.
Almost like an agreed assessment.
Almost, yeah. So that brings its own governance issues as well.
Sure, and
but
difficulties.
So it's a careful, it's something that has to be carefully considered.
Andre, systemic issues, we're still in that basket of issues.
Yeah,
what are your
I mean,
thoughts?
this the one thing that stands out to me is auto assessments this year. So what happened was SARS issued refunds before taxpayers could maybe even submit a corrected return, and those assessments are considered final, and then the refund pays out. And people, you know, if you get your refund, are you going to keep it, or like and then make a correction on your return? So the auto assessment issued went I'm going to use the word viral. It was on the news. I was on Newsroom 24, Newsroom 405, 500,000 views. So this was an issue, and I don't think SARS should refund assessments before a taxpayer had the chance to submit what they consider is a correct return, because you have various issues where, hey, it's my first year that I received rental income, but I got my auto assessment, or I'm married in community of property, but SARS didn't pick up that fact. They assessed me as out of community of property, and so auto assessments isn't systemic.
Did you find
issue.
that the third-party detail pulled through correctly, or was that also an issue?
Third-party data across the board improves year on year, but I think the fact that SARS decided this year to pay out refunds on base, because it's considered a final assessment, the auto assessment, I think is an incorrect, because it takes away agency from the taxpayer to submit what they consider a correct return.
Interesting thoughts. We've got a couple of minutes left. Happy to take some questions from the audience now.
Comment.
Mr. SARS.
Just in terms of the last comment on auto assessments, I think this is the area where we will agree to disagree. It's interesting, in the year where we did go the process where people had to accept or amend, we ended the period having to process a lot where people just ignored it. They don't care. And yes, there are some errors. We have to acknowledge that in terms of the auto assessment. But for the vast majority, and the comments that we got, if you go even onto our social media, it has been extremely positive. And if I may say, Elsera, my thinking is the practitioners are trying to protect ground. In most cases, there isn't an incorrect statement on the incorporation of interest, etc. Very few people start rental in a year. Very few people change their things. So we're getting 80% right. Yes, there's a number that are wrong. But the seamless process, and I was auto-assessed, by the way, incorrectly, but because of 18A, which we don't have the data, which next year we will have the data. But both my son and my daughter-in-law were assessed perfectly correctly. Their refunds were paid without them worrying about it, and they were extremely happy in terms of the process. So I think one must understand the process. We do believe, although there's other views, that the law does allow for it. And even in the discussions on the legislative changes last week, it was raised again in terms of this discussion. Just that brief comment. Thanks.
And Mark, just to comment on that, I suppose that SARS's main strategy is working towards voluntary compliance, not the program, holistically, of making it easier for the man on the street to comply without necessarily having the documentation, completing a return.
Correct. And the direction that we want to get to is that the tax debt for the majority, which are salaried people, would be resolved by the end of the year. There should be no refund, no paying in by the end of the year. And that's where we want to go. And in terms of our 2024, which will probably be 2026 vision, that is where we want to get to, that we have a zero base for the majority of the people. Now, this links into third-party data. What have we got available? We've spoken about trusts on day one of the Indaba, and there are concerns with some of the aspects. We've spoken about 18A, where that is the biggest remaining risk in terms of our data, but that will come in from next year. So I think we're going to see fundamental shifts for the majority of people where there is no need for a practitioner to add value. That doesn't stop the practitioners in the whole sole proprietor, complex other tax arrangements, etc., getting their adding value in that space. And we really, and I think we need to re-emphasize that this is not about taking money away from practitioners. It's about assisting taxpayers who should have no need for a practitioner in the process.
Thanks, Mark.
We have a question from the online audience. Paul asks, we generally found the process of the O2O to be very slow, and so we're generally only using TENT or Rule 56 as the preferred route on resolving delays. What can be done to improve the time frame of the OTO process?
Okay, in terms of reviewing of complaints, we have very strict timelines which we adhere to. However, taxpayers need to be aware that we rely on SARS to resolve their complaints. And also, if taxpayers are not cooperative with SARS when they request additional information, for example, unfortunately the Office of the Tax Ombud cannot assist in that regard, because what we noted is that when the delayed outcomes is where taxpayers are not adhering to what SARS is requesting them. There are also certain complaints, Ella, that really take long.
Sure.
Complaints that relates to fraud cases, and I'm glad Mark is here because I always engage him on that. They really take long because there's a lot of investigation that goes into it. And also with the appeal cases, they take quite some time, but we try our level best to facilitate resolution by always engaging with SARS.
Just to add on to that, regardless of those challenges, we're on time about 88% of the time.
Yes.
Better than fly as a flag.
Yes.
So let me get this right. 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
Wrap up remarks. Wayne.
Yeah, I think that our engagement with the OTO is generally very positive. Over the last, say, 6 months, I've seen a reduction in the number of complaints, particularly around appeals. So last month we got 10, and previous to that it was like 30, 40 a month. So we're working pretty hard with the OTO to reduce the volume of appeals complaints around appeals coming in. And we are focusing on the whole disputes as a process. And there's a lot of discussion happening internally in SARS to see how do we align this to international best practice, even though internationally there's no single methodology of dispute resolution. So we're heading in the direction of trying to reduce appeals as quickly, or disputes as quickly as we possibly can.
Thanks, Wayne. Andre?
Yeah, from my side, I think I've always enjoyed working with the Ombud and SARS. I do think that like we said, the communication from SARS to taxpayers can improve, but also the level of awareness of how to complain first to SARS and then reach the Ombud. More can be done about that awareness.
Talita?
Okay, all right. It's important for practitioners to know that when they lodge complaints with the Office of the Tax Ombud, that process does not stop the legislated timeframes within SARS, right? Because they would quickly come to us to say I'm not in agreement with the objection outcome, and not considering that they have a particular time frame to note an appeal. And so it's important for them to know that. And also please visit our website of the Tax Ombud. There's a lot of information that you could get in there. Thank you.
Closing, Dr. Owen.
Thank you very much. I think that automation is very good. I think SARS is automating their processes. We are also automating our process in order to make things easy for taxpayers. I mean, the goal of the office is to make tax compliance as pain-free as is possible and as painless as is possible. So we kind of like, our focus is to see those chickens laying eggs and sitting on them, as opposed to sitting on a phone waiting for a call center agent at the SARS answer. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thanks, Dr. Owen. Hope you all enjoyed. Our time's up. Thank you very much for listening.